Good afternoon. My name is Karin Ryan. I am the Senior Advisor for Human Rights here at the Carter Center. For the last few days, but really for many years, we have been engaged in a conversation about protecting the gains we have made for human rights since World War II. We worried after 9/11 that fear may send our societies into a vicious cycle of violence. We explored the reality that despite many advances in society, that violence and discrimination against women and girls, half of humanity continues unabated, and in some cases has worsened. President Carter led the way in pointing out that while religion has been used to oppress women and promote violence in some cases, that the more than 90% of humanity who are adherents to religious beliefs can lift up their voices and return to the true essence of our faiths, which is love and reciprocity, but that it will require a new resolve, and in fact, a new movement with love at its center. The next 2 days, we will continue this conversation because we need to see these facts within the larger frame of normalized violence and the failure of political and religious leaders to embrace peaceful and inclusive governance. And then we will lift up those of you here who have come from all over the world who are at great odds and at risk to your own lives, persevering and risking everything for justice and a future of peace. We invite you to participate, and those of you who are with us online, our session today is being webcast throughout the world. We hope you stay with us and share your thoughts using the hashtag #TimeForPeace. Tomorrow, we will issue a call for action at 4 p.m., and we hope you will join us as we send up this appeal and launch our hashtag #LoveIsTheAnswer campaign, where we will share stories and ideas about spreading solutions based on human compassion and, yes, love. But to get us started right, you all know me, right? You all know that I can't start anything without music. It is my pleasure to introduce the Universal Spirits Ensemble. This group is 30 years in the making. When Jamey, Haddad, and Tim Ries, wave your hand, Tim and Jamey, discussed bringing together a globally diverse group of like-minded musicians who are committed to advancing peace and justice with their music. Their dream is to take this ensemble on a world tour to engage with young people through educational outreach and creating local ambassadors for peace. And Tim was recently in refugee camps. He's serious about this, people. We are honored that this dream is born today here at the Carter Center. After this music, our CEO, Ambassador Miriam Peters, will introduce President Carter, who will speak to us about his vision for peace and human rights, as it is his vision and moral leadership that has brought us together this week. Tim.
Porque no nos ven hablar, porque no nos ven hablar. Dicen que no nos queremos, pero nosotros podemos con los ojos platicar, con los ojos platicar y hasta nos amanecemos.
I've been walking down this road for many years on my own, buying into losing hope, thinking that I'm all alone. Suddenly I hear you singing, and though it is too far away to sing, now I realize that you are on the way to me. Follow my voice, we're almost there. I'm gonna keep on walking, and I'll keep walking too. Can you hear me talking? Yeah, you're coming through. So I'm gonna keep on walking, and I'll keep walking too. Can you hear me talking? Yeah, you're coming through.
Kick this one here for me and my DJ. Kick this one here for me and my DJ. Kick this one here. Kick. It's like L-I-F-E, love infinitely forever. Even when the blues isn't getting more better. War is impossible to open doors in cold weather. So you gotta transform never into forever. You saw it better when your feathers ain't ruffled. And the soul molesters can't touch you. We're trying to intertwine scuffles, design struggles. Combine troubles with the non-subtle rhyme hustle. I push through with my Einstein mind muscle. Strong enough so space and time can't crush you. Even when you can, theoretically relative. Even in the room with the purple brown elephant. Watch the waters rise, parts of you sort of die. You'll become immortalized, metamorphosized before the eyes. We soar to the wise, on the microphone soar to the skies. Doing it for peace and love around the earth, man. We gotta represent this race since the birth, man. Yo, you find it in your heart center. We do it at the Jimmy Carter Center. We enter a new age, a new sage. Turn the page, burn the sage. Rock on the mic with gauge. We engage, then we submerge and emerge and diverge. On the microphone converge with the whole crew, the world peace musician. You listen, a beautiful night, but syllables right to mission. Take it to the tunnel of port, no support in Atlanta. We come to champion, rock at the round table. Everybody, whether you're disabled, we able to come together and bring it together. All nations, creation. Yo, Brazilians and Haitians, Americans and Europeans, Russians, what you see it, we see it all across the world. African the continent. Yo, I've been rhyming since an infant, and I'm going to preach you and teach you to each and every one of you. I stand in front of you, coming through on the mic as we just start a fire. Rock on the mic, take it higher. Like slide in the family stone, coming through. We harder than the rock though. Let's go, rock with the Rolling Stones on the microphone, and we got the golden toe. Come on, as we do it like this, coming through on the mic, we never use this. Yo, take the example of Jimmy Carter. He was not a war starter, he was a martyr for peace. And all help him. We do it like this, y'all. We rock like this, y'all. Rock, we rock like this, y'all. Rock like this, come on.
too. Are you here talking? Yes, you're coming through. I'm gonna keep on talking, and I'll keep talking too. Can you hear me talking? Yeah, you're coming through. Talking, I'll keep walking too. Can you hear me talking? Yeah, you're coming through. Again. Walking, and I'll keep walking too. Hey, you. Yeah, you're coming through. You're great.
Please introduce everyone. I want you to the names and countries.
Thank you on behalf of this amazing group of musicians and singers and President Carter. I'm a huge fan for many, many years. Read all of your books. So when I met Karin and she invited me, I was like, yes, and I have the band for you. And she said, do it. And I'm like, I called Jamey, this great gentleman on percussion, Jamey Haddad from Cleveland, Ohio, but living in New York City. Now back in Cleveland with Paul Simon's band. And this was kind of a dream of ours. And one omission today is you'll notice the violinist and singer George Lamam is a Palestinian great musician, grew up in Lebanon and living in California, but his flight was canceled today, so that's why you do not see him here. But these great musicians, Mr. Ilan Barlavi from Mexico City and from Jerusalem, Mira Awad, Palestinian, also living in Tel Aviv. This lovely young lady has my same last name because she's my daughter. So Jasia Ries. Okay, so this gentleman, and what was amazing about music is that I've known these musicians for many years, but some of them I've just met within the last couple of days, because Jamey and I put together the group of people, and I called Terreon, the drummer, who do you know as a rapper? And he suggested, and then who's a percussionist? So we kind of pooled our resources together to put this group together, and some of the people were just for the first time today, we rehearsed this music. So, by the way, this song was written in the last 2 days while we were experiencing this wonderful, happenings the last couple of days. We've sort of been listening to the incredible talks of people who have lost loved ones, and also who are really passionate about peace and have done so much already. But in doing so, we created this song just in these last 2 days. So the lyrics were written by Mira and Jasia, and Dashill, also the great rapper. So this was just created today for you guys. This wonderful bass player with Paul Simon Bakithi, Kumalo from South Africa. And hailing from New Jersey, but now living in California for many years, who's a beatboxer, as you heard. He plays great saxophone and woodwinds, and he does a lot of stuff in prison systems, actually, in California, to help young men who have been incarcerated, but creating music to help them, channel a different sort of energy, and he's done so much. Mr. Charles Moselle. And Dashill Smith, the great, which you heard, which is an amazing rapper and trumpeter, so thank you so much. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. And this gentleman back on the drums, who's a good friend who I met through Charlie Watts, the Stones drummer, kept talking about this guy for many years. And I'm like, okay, yes, I know him. But then we met backstage, and finally we hooked up and did some gigs, and finally we did a recording after so many years. But I'm very happy that you came, originally from St. Louis, but living in Atlanta. Terreon Gully on drums. And the gentleman on the tablas, who I just met a couple of days ago, but was recommended by Jamey, who also plays in Jamey's group, Mr. Salar, Nader, whose family's from Afghan and grew up in Germany and then California. But thank you so much for being here. So beautiful. And the gentleman on the piano, I just met through Karin, and he's not listed, but we expected him to be kind of in a more producer sort of aspect, which he is in California, Mr. Casey Porter, but he sounds beautiful on piano, so he said, can I play? I'm like, are you kidding? You have to play. So, but anyway, this is an amazing group of musicians that they feel like family, even though actually one is my family, but But that's what's unique about music. Maybe you can tell this is that we are family. This is like the most, I think, the greatest thing about music is that it brings so many people together so instantly after maybe never meeting or meeting one day and playing this song that means so much to us, and hopefully you can feel that, but that instantly I'm going to be connected to these people for the rest of my life, and that's what we hope to channel that into further gigs and workshops in schools. So thank you so much for having us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Wasn't that amazing? As Karin mentioned earlier, I'm Marianne Peters, the CEO of the Carter Center, and today I have both the honor and the challenge of introducing our next speaker to this audience. All of you already know President Carter as a former President of the United States, as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, as the founder, with his wife Rosalind, of the Carter Center, and as the author of 29 books. But here I think I'd like to introduce someone who is also one of the foremost advocates in the world for the rights of women and girls, and a great peacemaker, President Jimmy Carter.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think I'd rather follow Billy Graham or Martin Luther King Jr. than to follow that, that orchestra there. It was really great. I was on a battleship in the Atlantic Ocean in 1945, when the world's powers got together and formed the United Nations with a clear and expressed purpose of preventing war in the future. The United Nations was dedicated to peace. And then a few years later, the same global powers assembled and concluded a commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, those two great commitments have been abandoned by the world. The United Nations is no longer a repository and a guarantor of peace. And even the greatest of nations have not met the expectations of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This year, in this forum, we are striving to encapsulate ideas from the previous, I think, 13 years of meetings, with an emphasis on reducing government commitments and investment of human and financial resources into violence and warfare at the expense of human rights and peaceful solutions to problems. What is needed now more than ever is leadership that steers us away from fear and fosters greater confidence in the inherent goodness and ingenuity of humanity. Last year, governments and people united behind the new edition, you might say, of Sustainable Development Agenda, And number 16, and you can look it up, one of its key commitments is to, and I quote, to reduce violence and related death rates, to end abuse, to end exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of torture, to promote the rule of law at the national and international levels, and to ensure equal access to justice for all. It emphasizes that inclusive and peaceful societies are the key to progress. So here's another effort. Many years later, 60 years later, to recommit the world powers and people to the finest aspects of moral and ethical values that we inherit from our major religions. This forum here is exploring how we can hold our governments accountable to that commitment at a time when conflict and violent extremism are both on the rise. Since the attacks of September 11th, 2001, known as 9/11, we brought together some of the world's most effective and courageous human rights defenders here, and also peacemakers, to work for human freedom and peace while limiting the reach of violent extremists. Representatives from more than 50 nations have met here to discuss the rise of militarism and the reliance on violence by the major powers to address the threat of terrorism. During that time, we've seen the, quote, global war on terror escalate out of control and result in erosion of human rights and more widespread violence. On 9/11, a small but determined and well-organized number of al-Qaeda members were confined to a relatively small geographic area. But related movements have now spread widely throughout most of the world, partly because of an unbalanced militaristic response to the attacks by the major powers. Torture has been carried out with impunity, even in my own country. The right to privacy has disappeared, and freedoms of religion, association, and speech are under attack. In recent years, I've spoken out the best I could about the abuse of religious scriptures to promote various forms of violence, including the death penalty, discrimination and abuse of women, and unjust resort to warfare. These are direct violations of my own faith and other great religions, which are founded on love and kindness to strangers, not judging others, justice, and resolving disputes in the least violent manner. The cynical use of religion by groups like al-Qaeda, Daesh, and Boko Haram has had catastrophic consequences to which the United Nations and major governments have failed to respond adequately. In recent years, this forum has explored the setbacks experienced by women and girls, as some major leaders use religion to exert control over their lives and to dominate the life of communities and families. Drawing on these discussions, I authored a book called A Call to Action, Women, Religion, Violence, and Power, in which I describe the almost unbelievable persistence of violence against females of all ages. We explored how girl children face discrimination even before they are born through sex-selective abortions and infanticide, the horrible forced marriage of young girls by the millions, the trafficking of women and girls into sex slavery, and the tragic phenomena of genital cutting and so-called honor killings. The ongoing problem of sexual violence plagues almost every nation. 1 in 3 women face intimate violence sometime in their lives. Unchecked sexual assault in our American military and on our major college campuses continues on a scale that is direct proof that male abuse and domination of women has become normalized. It's a normal thing to expect. We tend to ignore the fact that women are paid about 23% less than men for a year's hard work. We must also realize that women are key agents of the changes we need. Women are excluded from leadership, in religion, in family and community decision-making, and in legislatures and other political offices. And as Karin mentioned earlier, when half of the world's population is not consulted on important decisions and policies, it's no wonder that so many problems persist. Societies that exclude or permit abuse of women are more violent and more warlike, while having women at the forefront of peace efforts or community dialogue tends to calm tensions and avert hostilities. We know that some of the most warlike leaders have been women, but when women are empowered in significant numbers, in the corporate world as well as in politics and in daily life, better decisions are made and more sustainable solutions are adopted. Last year, here we heard testimony from women from Colombia, Iraq, Nigeria, Syria, the United States, and other nations involved in warfare who told us that they warned their governments of coming crises and sought to have preventive action, but that their voices were ignored or suppressed. Where would we be today, you think, if their voices had been heard and governments had listened to their peace efforts and human rights defenders, especially women? It's clear that we must embrace human rights and aggressively challenge our society's acceptance of violence, which should never be seen as normal or as a preferred means of solving problems. But we know that this is true. The first time a problem arises in the world, the first response is, what kind of violence would control this new problem? But violence is now normal in our homes, communities, in our culture, in law enforcement, and also in foreign policy. Here in the United States, lethal police violence and the use of the death penalty disproportionately against African Americans communicates a clear message that the state may kill in the interest of public safety, ignoring far less violent means of protecting the public. The public at large responds by thinking that violence is useful in achieving peaceful objectives. That's a contrary factor in words. Violence is useful in achieving peaceful objectives. While defending a community or a nation with military police is sometimes justifiable, war is sometimes necessary. The distinction between self-defense and excessive force against others has been undermined in the global wars on terror, drugs, and crime. I'm grateful that many of you have launched effective collaboration between citizens and government to reduce violence, advance human rights, and create economic prosperity. Determined diplomacy has resulted in the nuclear non-proliferation agreement with Iran, possibly avoiding a war. And also the new normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba. We celebrate these hopeful examples while remembering that all too often unnecessary violence prevails. The United States is complicit in the oppression of abusive governments when we provide weapons and financial aid to them, as is the case in Egypt, in Honduras, and other nations. And we must never forget the plight of the Palestinians. We lose sight of the fact that violence is evidence of failure, not success. We fail to heed signs of trouble early enough to address the underlying cause of the problems, or we are in denial about the cause of the problem. We may be too self-serving to care about it, or we seek power and are content with the situation, especially when only the other side is suffering, as from high-level bombing or the use of drones. We cannot condemn, we cannot end or control the tide of personal, family, or community violence, and definitely not terrorism, until we reduce excessive state violence and militarism. I remember that in 1968, opposing the war in Vietnam, Martin Luther King Jr. stated that it was not possible to separate excessive state-sanctioned violence from the bloodshed in our communities. They both exist when we normalize violence. He called on us to reject violence and its cycle of destruction. The world needs to heed his call today. We are at a turning point in history. We can choose either policies of peace and human rights, or we can continue our moves toward warfare and human suffering. This is also a time when ordinary people throughout the world are expressing fear, frustration, and anxiety about the future. Many people have lost trust in their own governments as a social contract phrase. But instead of allowing for constructive dialogue with the public, many governments have tightened their grip, treating journalists and regular citizens as threats to national security. Meanwhile, governments invest far too much in the machinery of war, when investment in human rights would produce more peaceful results. Peace and prosperity are more likely when people are included and respected by their own governments. The Arab awakening, or the Arab Spring, began when young people rejected systemic human rights by abuses and unjust governments. The catastrophic violence that has occurred or followed this is a failure of those nations' leaders to govern justly, and a failure of the international community to help create and support inclusive peace processes and democratic institutions. The cost of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan so far is nearing $1.7 trillion. That's $1,700 billion. And global military spending is on the rise, now reaching the level that we knew during the Cold War. The manufacturing and sale of small arms, the cause of 90% of civilian deaths, has skyrocketed since 9/11. The expanded use of drone warfare by the United States outside of declared war zones may constitute war crimes, according to the United Nations. Even though some dangerous terrorists are killed, they're immediately replaced. And the use of drones results in more people joining extremist organizations and may make this a choice of both other countries and also perhaps terrorist groups in distant future, perhaps not so distant. What would we do if almost every country on earth could afford a few drones loaded with weapons flying over perhaps American cities? The next president of the United States will decide whether to commit more than $1 trillion, $1,000 billion, to upgrade an already excessive nuclear arsenal, including a cruise missile with a nuclear warhead that's called the long-range standoff weapon. All of the so-called upgrades in our nuclear arsenals are actually new technologies that will spur current and potential nuclear powers into joining a new arms race. This will result in tremendous increases of military expenditures by many nations. We should reduce nuclear arsenals, not build new ones. Our next president should reinvigorate the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT is called, and enter determined negotiations with existing and potential nuclear nations, I'd say particularly with Pakistan and India, that are a threat to humanity's existence and a drain on our resources. As long as our new investments in warfare outpace those in peaceful solutions, we will be swimming against an increasingly forceful tide. Tomorrow, this group will issue a call for peace, dignity, and justice, or has a new name? Okay, we're working on it. We'll decide on the title in the future, but we'll have to decide before tomorrow when we're going to issue this call. But anyway, I'll send this document to the leaders of the U.S. Congress, to the incumbent president, and to candidates who seek the White House in November. And I urge every one of you to share this document with your own government. From this conference, we set our sights on a world in which there is a renewed commitment to human rights and peace. It's just that simple. Restore, recommit ourselves and our governments to human rights and peace. We must leave behind the fruitless and catastrophic enmities and competitions that have left our world divided and fearful. In the spirit of the Universal Declaration, the Universal Sustainable Development Agenda, we call on all governments to respond peacefully to the inevitable challenges that we'll face in the future. The United States is a world superpower, and we are likely to maintain the strongest military and also an influential culture, as well as one of the dominant economies. We're likely to have that in future years. My prayer is that we also, the United States, become the undisputed champion of peace. Would it be nice if every country on earth, when they had a threat of warfare, would say, why don't we go to Washington? Because the American people are dedicated to peace. My prayer also is that we also become the undisputed champion of human rights. We should restore the United Nations to its original purpose and commitment. Our hallmark should be a peaceful diplomacy. We know that among the founding fathers of our country, they knew that human rights, or those that they expressed specifically, was the driving force in the creation of our nation. As I've said once before, early on, the United States did not invent human rights. Human rights have been invented in America. And we should once more set an example for the rest of the world. We should be preeminent also in gender equality. People everywhere should see us in the forefront of the struggle for environmental equality, dealing effectively with the real threat of global warming. Every citizen should be confident that our children and grandchildren will have a happier and more fulfilling life, even than the one we have. We should be seen as generous in sharing our wealth and prosperity with others. I could go on down the list. My ultimate hope, however, is that people of all nations will join in kind of a competition for best exemplifying and demonstrating these commitments. I would say again, to peace and human rights. Thank you.
Feedback. Thank you. Thank you, President Carter. That's how to start us off right here, right? Is to get our heads straight, because when we started this process, we said we need a new vision. The world is going a certain way, and we want to say, no, that's not the way we need to go. We need to go another way, 180 degrees different. And you have laid that out for us. Now, my job is just to report on the discussion that we had this weekend, so that those who were not there are able to capture some of the spirit, which was high, the very high spirit ending yesterday, as we heard the testimonies of these courageous and wonderful people who've come from 22 countries this year to be with us. Many have traveled many hours from as far as Somalia, Egypt, Colombia. I could list the countries, but we are grateful to the travels they have made, and especially to those of our Muslim brothers and sisters who are here during Ramadan, despite a great difficulty and sacrifice. We began our discussions on Saturday morning by reflecting on the challenges that today hate rhetoric fills the airwaves. inspiring acts of violence by people who have been persuaded that they must fear that which they do not understand. The husband of Joe Cox, the British MP and social justice activist that was slain last week, called out the proponents of peace and human rights, so us, for being too quiet and meek in the face of hate and violence, vowing to carry on the work of his wife. He and she had 2 young children. He challenged us to be better at making our case than those who are consumed by hate. We spoke about how the overly militarized response to the attacks of 9/11, as President Carter just laid out, has in fact resulted in the metastasizing of violent extremism. We reflected on that idea that violence begets violence, and extreme violence begets extreme violence. We prepared for this discussion by imagining where the world will be in 2030 if we continue with the current state of global affairs, and then by asking, how can we change the story? What would the world look like in 2030 if we started investing in peace today, in 2040, in 2050? Because we cannot fall into despair. We have to look at the horizon point that we are setting together and design our actions based on that new vision. Participants reflected a common vision that at its core is respect for human rights. And I want to share a few of these statements that our participants made as their vision statements. The vision for 2030. If we invest in peace today, in 2030, I envision a concept of war. The concept of war and violence is a historical oddity. If we invest in peace today, I envision waking up on a Sunday without being shocked yet again by what people who have lost their humanity can do. If we invest in peace today, I envision a world in which human rights is not only evoked when there is a problem, but is the prevailing worldview. If we invest in peace today, in 2030, I envision a world in which we embrace the narrative of those who are marginalized and oppressed, and they can tell their own stories. If we invest in peace today, we will have a level playing field for women and men, because women truly are the twin sisters of men, and whatever men deserve, so do women. I just have to say that this came from our partners from Ghana who joined us across the ocean, and I especially love that. If we invest in peace today, we will not need a peace movement anymore, because we will have peace and justice in our homes, in our communities, and among nations. Women who suffered sexual violence will be accepted, respected, and have what they need to rebuild their lives. Girls and boys will have no fear of violence. A child will ask the question, what is meant by the word war? No hatred between people of different religions. Young people will step into leadership. Men have taken a step behind women as they lead us to peaceful solutions. We will make space for and listen carefully to the voices of those who suffer. And the word security will no longer be equated with violence, but will stand for human well-being and freedom from fear, want, and oppression. And the end, once and for all, of the war on terror, the war on drugs, the war on women, the war on children, replacing it with President Carter's competition among governments, which one is the most peaceful and respectful of human rights. We will move from violence to compassion at all levels. And the production and marketing of cultural products that glorify violence and hate will be illegal and rejected by society. Nuclear weapons are eliminated and small arms successfully controlled. And from our friend Lisa Sharon Harper, who can't be with us today, the lion has finally lain down with the lamb, and today's swords are beaten into plowshares. We spoke of the economics of peace, that inequality and the international economic policies that perpetuate it create global insecurity. Extreme capitalism and privatization of development and widespread militarization erode previous gains in the area of human rights norms. Nations spend far more on weapons and war than they invest in development and public services. We know that environmental resources are exploited unsustainably, producing not only the degradation to the environment, but also violence against the activists who fight against that inequality. We heard from Laura Caceres, the daughter of Berta Caceres, an indigenous environmental activist from Honduras who was assassinated earlier this year, about how US policy to support the current government has meant that police and military have been emboldened to crack down on nonviolent activists who challenge the power of corporations who commit human rights violations and exploit the environment. We must begin asking, what is the economy for? How can we effectively advance a just economic order? Human rights is the framework for ensuring a just economic policy. It just hasn't been used yet. This is vital for achieving peace because again and again we hear about extreme economic inequality, and inequality of opportunity and voice is a driver of the vulnerability that allows young men and women to be recruited into extremists and other groups. Or as Sister Simone said, violence is the result of the failure to achieve the common good. We learned that, in fact, Adam Smith's vision of the economy was that it would serve the common good. Yet dominant economic narratives assume that inherent inequality of our economic system will be rectified by the winners compensating the losers. Yet as we now know, power interferes to prevent this. We spoke about how to unlearn violence. Even before violence erupts, human beings are conditioned to react to conflict, and as our tension as they would react to a physical threat. The overall cultural environment is imbued with messaging that entrench rigid and ideological beliefs. Popular culture and narratives that imbue the principles of human rights and peace has the potential to transform individuals' thinking and learned behavior. In our discussions, we heard how it is possible to unlearn violence, but requires divesting from violence and investing in peace. As Sheikh Mohammed Sharif Diop from Tostan emphasized, human rights itself is a tool for educating people to bring about the change in social norms that perpetuates violence. And when we spoke about securing the people, we noted that civilians are increasingly subject to violence under this idea of security that was really about regime protection, not protection of the people. This begs the question, whose security matters? And we spoke about building a peace movement to reject violence and secure human rights. And for the rest of these 2 days, we will hear more about these subjects from the experts. And then we will turn our attention to what would it take to build a movement together for these outcomes that we want, for this shift from fear to confidence, so that we can replace every thought of hate with a thought of love, replace every thought of war with a thought of peace. In our concluding sessions tomorrow, we will address this and lay the groundwork for this movement to reclaim the mantle of peace and human rights for our world. And now I would like to introduce the representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, who we are so happy to have with us, Laura Pereira.
Thank you very much, Karin. Mr. President, friends and colleagues, it's a real privilege and an honor to be here today sharing some remarks with you. The question before us could hardly be more important or more timely. How can we reject violence and build a peace movement that secures human rights for all? The title of this forum reflects the words of another great American peace builder, Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." I want to use this point about justice to guide my reflection over three key issues that were raised during our discussion over the last few days. Language. During the workshop discussions, one of the messages that I got was that we're looking for a unifying language, a way to relate complex and compelling stories, to engage in complex policy arguments, and to touch and mobilize people into holding their government accountable for their actions at home and abroad. A vocabulary that exposes selfish narratives for what they are and counters them with words that inspire. There are ways of speaking which have rendered many people, their experiences, their aspirations, their humanity, invisible. We don't hear about the work that women are doing in Syria to keep their families and communities intact. Nor do we hear about what drove a young boy growing up in Somalia to join Al-Shabaab. What education was offered to him? How often did he go hungry? What conclusions did he come to about the state of the world that made the ideas of a group simply called the young ones or youth so attractive to him? In many ways, the use of violence is a means of communication. It's a means of achieving visibility. Maybe if we can provide a young armed person with alternative forms of survival and of communicating his or her grievance, we can begin to see what creating justice in his or her world would look like. Human rights in their substance are central to this. It's not that people must speak in a fixed set of words in order to be heard. Not at all. Rather, it's that through human rights mechanisms we have achieved conceptual and legal work that can provide meaning and substance to words such as democracy, equality, freedom, and rights. A rich body of work developed over decades brings to life what it means to have freedom of movement, freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom from torture and ill treatment, freedom from arbitrary detention, and rights such as right to education, to work, to health, to food, to development, to shelter, and so on. And just like our social bonds and our needs, all of these concepts are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Human rights are also embedded in national and international legal structures, and as such, there are actual tools that can be leveraged to achieve and secure social change. Violence. Much of our discussion also revolved around violence. We spoke about violence as acts committed by individuals, and also as political and economic structures that attacks a person's dignity and ability to be themselves. There is also the violence that is sanctioned by the state. Security measures and security-based policies have run roughshod over fundamental human rights and closed down the space for civic activity. The Special Rapporteur for Human Rights and Counterterrorism, Ben Emerson, has exposed that the use of torture, unlawful killing, targeted assassinations, unlawful restrictions on the freedoms of association, religion, and expression, the denial of rights for the victims of terrorism, the use of far-reaching financial regulations that close down humanitarian space, as well as prevent vital local peace-building work from taking place, have all resulted from security measures applied almost equally all around the world. These measures have left many people feeling as though they are invisible to the institutions of justice, and in some cases rendering them literally invisible. The concept of justice has thus been eroded under these conditions. In presenting his plan of action to prevent violent extremism earlier this year, the United Nations Secretary-General emphasized that in recent years, the utter disregard for human rights has often made things worse, and that these violations in turn help to fuel the narratives and recruitment of groups like ISIL, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and others. The Secretary-General's action plan is ambitious and far-reaching. It offers a departure from a hard security approach to countering terrorism, but we need to be wary of sweeping catch-all definitions of violent extremism, which are all too often used as a pretext for repressing legitimate political opposition and clamping down on civil society, with women's groups often bearing the brunt. Violent extremism. During our discussion, we also heard from those who work in the context of violent extremism. The lack of a definition of violent extremism has left the term open to interpretation, and many times it is used as a cipher for religion, usually a particular strand of the Muslim faith. A special rapporteur on the freedom of religion, Mr. Heiner Bielefeld, has pointed out that we need to separate the role of religion from that of specific actors when we analyze our current situation. Also, from a human rights perspective, it is better to speak of dangerous acts rather than dangerous isms, which imply judgment over certain ways of thinking. It helps us to keep on the right side of the law when we try to deal with extreme violence rather than violent extremism. Extreme violence is empowered by tyranny, corruption, repression, discrimination, and neglect. We must find ways to make state institutions participatory and effective so that they deliver public services in a non-discriminatory way. We need to promote initiatives that offer channels for marginalized communities to convey legitimate grievances. Human rights increases security. When people trust their government, rule of law and media, and feel that opportunities are open to them, they do not fall prey to narratives that encourage the destruction of their own social fabric. Governments are the primary agents with the responsibility and capability of changing the tide that we're in. So I'd like to leave you with the words of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad al-Husseini, when he addressed member states during the 32nd session of the Human Rights Council last week. His speech is entitled, "Hate is Being Mainstreamed," and this is just an extract from it. When the Inter-American Commission announces that it has cut its personnel by 40%, and when states have already withdrawn from it and the Inter-American Court, when state parties have threatened to withdraw from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and even more recently, others threatened to leave the United Nations or the European Court of Human Rights and the European Union, when those calling for departure have seemingly already fled in their minds from the urge to protect the world from the untold sorrow and miseries which twice swept it and brought about the creation of many of these very institutions, when filthy abuse by politicians of the vulnerable is tolerated, when the laws, human rights law, refugee law, international humanitarian law, are increasingly violated, when hospitals are bombed, but no one is punished, when human rights, the two words, are so rarely found in the world of finance and business, in its literature or in its lexicon. Why? Because it is shameful to mention them? When working for the collective benefit of all people everywhere is apparently losing its ardor, and features only in empty proclamations, swelling with unjustified self-importance and selfishness. Then do we really still have an international community? When the threads forming it are being tugged away and the tapestry, our world, is unraveling? Or are there only fragmented communities of competing interests, strategic and commercial, operating behind a screen of feigned allegiance to laws and institutions? I think of a video clip I saw on the internet only days ago, where the body of a young child, a young girl, with a face that is white with dust, nose bloodied, hair springing still with life, yet her body crushed, inert as rubble, was dug out from where she was bombed in a building in Syria. The poet Hafiz says, "As pallid ghosts appears, speak the epic of thy pain." Please stop this, because this madness can be stopped. Thank you for listening.
Lara, thank you so much. I think you pulled together all of the ideas that we discussed over these last 3 days. We actually have a few minutes before we end, And first I want to ask Ambassador Peters or President Carter if they would like to make any additional comments, and our Vice President for Peace, Jordan Ryan. But I feel if there is something on anyone's heart immediately among our group to speak now, especially I want to privilege maybe our elders, because we respect wisdom among us. If our great sisters, I put you up front for a reason, because we know the wisdom resides in you. So I wonder if either one of you want to share a few words with us now, if you would like to, yeah.
In our religious tradition, I say, come Holy Spirit, and trust, because I was so moved by both President Carter, your presentation, and also Laura, yours, because the key is for us to know the deep truth that we are all connected, and to not turn our backs on that reality out of fear for my individual self. And the fear that you referenced in the beginning, President Carter, is, I think, the desire for control and the desire for a security that can only be found in each other, in community, not in separateness. And what we've heard so much these last few days for me has been about community can be the stabilizing force for real growth and development, and that our community needs to be that global web of relationships, that this is a step towards weaving, and I'm grateful.
Thank you, Simone. Certainly thank you, President Carter. At a time like this, for a person like me, the pressure and the pain is almost overwhelming. Why? Because somebody like me sits here and says, but what can I do? I've spent my entire life doing something that is apparently nothing. Well, I can't leave here today without doing something. I'm a writer. They don't do anything. They don't even earn a decent living. I'm a speaker. That's nonsense on the run. I'm a voice, but the voice is largely unheard. And then I remember, as I understand that Simone is thinking about too, this morning I got up and wrote a column about this event that I call In Behalf of the Human Family. And I base it on a young woman here who doesn't know that she's written about, a young woman by the name of Melinda, who at the opening of this group, before we had all gathered, looked up in the middle of a conversation with a group of us and said, "Oh, my family." And I looked around, and across the hall came a large contingent of African Americans from all over the globe, and some from the States themselves. The embrace was as real as anything I've ever seen in my family, certainly that real. And I looked at her, and I looked at all of you, and I thought back over my life, one meeting after another, in the face of rejection after rejection after rejection, lived in hope, and now dying close to the end, and seeing it get worse, apparently instead of better, and suddenly realized inside myself that the connection of family that happened here, thanks to you, President Jimmy Carter, whom I met for the first time I came to Atlanta. I came with a group of 25 religious leaders as a support to your first campaign. This young man walked in the room, quiet. I thought maybe he was the butler. I didn't know what he was doing there. I I'd never met him. I didn't know him. And he opened his mouth like he did this morning, and I knew that there was a voice piercing the noise and the darkness. And having that voice go on to this very day in my own life teaches me again what we must do. We must simply keep doing what we must, however we do it. Those are the chains and the link of family. This is the beginning of the human family. And our sincerity with one another is the voice of God among us. I thank you for that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have done it. Most of all, I'm thankful for what I saw and heard here. God bless you.
I'd like to ask you to get your earpiece here. I'm going to call on Laura Caceres. I mentioned her earlier, from Honduras. So for English, it's channel 3. Français, c'est numéro 8.
Well, I'm going to start thanking the interpreters who are going to give me words today, and they will lend me their words. So while you put your earphones in, thank you very much for allowing us to speak about peace as something live, not something inert, not something to be lived with joy, which is how we imagine our future. I'm going to speak about my mother as if I had not spoken yesterday, perhaps with the same shock of more than 3 months ago when I was told that the bullets had broken my mother's chest. I'm going to speak with a shock that perhaps the young girls, the women feel, those who experience the murder of our feminine self, of this part of our being, which is our mother. My mom loved life. She loved life with a passion. With a passion that was so great for the defense of life, of the territories, of the peoples. She struggled to give voice to people so that through that word they might live in peace. To live without large companies, corporations would attack their territories and subject them to violence. And she was murdered for her struggle. She was murdered for not giving an opportunity to violence and death to act in our indigenous territories. Today, we live with the pain. I live with the pain that my mother's arms, my mother's love has been taken from me, and it has always been taken away from the Lenca people, from the Honduran people who live today with the absence of a leader who struggled to defend that people. Today I must also live without being able to give myself the time to mourn her, because I have to face the Honduran state who has denied me the opportunity to feel the tranquility and the peace that I will have justice, because they're also implicated in many ways in this murder. Because she was placed in a vulnerable situation, they put her in jail because she was persecuted, and they gave power to that enterprise to ensure that she would be dead. They were given power through the armed forces and through the police to persecute her, because they gave the weapons and they gave the permission without the consent of the people to be able to act. So today, we go back, walk through the world and ask for justice. Justice that has to do with an independent investigation. And it would be very nice for us that starting from these spaces, that we could dream of peace. And I think that we can build that peace working every day, working with our soul, with our bodies for that peace. And we might also be able to achieve justice for Berta Cáceres, who becomes a symbol of struggle, of resistance, who becomes a symbol to be able to achieve that peace. But she is also a symbol of Honduran women who today are being murdered for raising their voices, who today are being also murdered because they are women. So, I invite Mr. President, I invite all the people who are here today to rebel in the face of this murder through justice, because I believe the Honduran people, such a nice people, we deserve justice, but I think the world deserves justice. And I also believe that my mother, Berta Cáceres, guardian of the rivers as she is called, also deserves that justice. Thank you very much.
Rana, did you indicate that you wanted to speak? No. Yeah. No, okay. Robina from Uganda.
President Carter, I shared with the participants what peace means to women of Uganda. If you ask an ordinary woman, a typical ordinary woman, what peace means to her, she will tell you, peace to me is when I can afford to feed all my children. Peace to me is when my child is sick, I can afford health care for them. She will tell you, peace to me is when I get tired, I can rest without anyone complaining. She will tell you, peace to me is when I can afford to keep my daughter in school. The little girls of Uganda, the majority of them, are not able to complete school for flimsy reasons. Their parents cannot afford school uniform. Their parents cannot afford textbooks. Their parents cannot afford $5 to pay for the development fund. Or their parents cannot afford sanitary pads. So the girls drop out of school. For a mother of such a woman, there is no peace, even when the guns fell silent in 2006. 18 women die on a daily basis in Uganda due to childbearing causes. So in this meeting, we asked the question, who are the economies for? Our economies must work for women and girls in our countries. I thank you.
Rana Allam from Egypt.
Hello. Sir, you have been involved in the peace process many, many years ago for Egypt, and you were integral in bringing peace to my country at some point. That peace has been ongoing until now. The problem is that we need you again. Right now, it's time for yet another involvement, because the people of Egypt are suffering under this military rule that we're under. We are not in the news anymore. We are sidelined, and yet we are really, really suffering. Human rights violations are unprecedented in my country, and weapons are being sold, are still being sold to our president, and he's using them to kill us. He's not using them in any war. It's against us. At some point in 4 hours, almost 2,000 people were shot in a square in Cairo. And yet, this president is still getting the support of the world, the whole world, including the United States. We need someone to move. I don't know who, I don't know what, I don't know how, but something has to be done. Thank you.
Charo.
President Carter, Afro-descendant people in Colombia have brought their blood and have brought through hundreds of years their wisdom, our ways of living, our ways of thinking life and peace to contribute to build a country that is today Colombia. Today there is a peace process ongoing, and Afro-descendant people has to once more expose our children, our sisters and daughters, our partners, our brothers, in order to get recognized and seen as humans and our dignity. We are not part of the peace process and the dialogues that are happening in Colombia. And as other voices has preceded me, once again, we have to ask you to please be part again of this urge to call the Colombian government to make sure that Afro-descendant people as full participate of the implementation of peace in Colombia. I really greatly appreciate your intervention. And I have to say, my son, when he knew that I was coming and seeing you, asked me if you please sign something for him. So I gotta get that request. Thank you so much.
Fatima.
Thank you so much. President Carter, last time I met you, I was in your mission in Egypt monitoring the elections. And we discussed Yemen, as I come from there. And there were some hopes that, after the Arab Spring, that the situation would be better in Yemen. And today there's war. And there is war by people who do not want war and do not subscribe to this violence that's going on. This war has not enabled me to go back home. In a similar situation, the Syrian people are facing an ongoing war as well. And I've had the pleasure of meeting the people who are not refugees, but actually trapped in Syria, in the conflict and they are very much forgotten. I have met Syrian youth from Salamia, which was about 15 to 20 kilometers away from ISIS in a government-controlled territory. And what was very striking for me is that they were going on about their lives. We met in Lebanon, but they were so eager to go back home, despite even one day of being away from their country. And peace, for me, for many people in the Middle East, is just the ability to go back home and live safely. It's not the desire to just go out for economic prosperity or leave or just migrate. People would rather be home, build a better future for them and for their families. And this forum, thanks to Karin, everybody who organized this, has given me some hope in terms of putting back the ideas and power back in the community and looking to ways in empowering the communities to do so. Thank you.
Isam, and then, yes, Murabi.
Today we celebrate the Refugee International Day, and I'm just curious to hear President Carter's thoughts. As this country for decades the refugees' plight has always enjoyed bipartisan support in Washington. And lately things have changed dramatically as 17 states here in the United States refuse to resettle refugees. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and feedbacks about the plight of refugees and how we can change the conversation here in this country.
Well, I've listened to all of the comments, and they prey on my heart. I wouldn't be welcome if I tried to go back to Egypt anymore. That used to be one of my favorite places to go for vacations and to visit friends, but I'm not welcome there now. Colombia, we're trying to work with your people to bring peace, and I'll be glad to sign something for your son. Unfortunately, the United States has been somewhat supportive of the Saudi Arabians' bombing of Yemen, and I'm sorry about that. As far as the refugees are concerned, I spent a week in London recently, and I pointed out to an audience there that when I was president, we were faced with the refugees from the Vietnam War, from Vietnam who were on the losing side, and from Cambodia. I was accepting 12,000 refugees a month. And we try to get all of the countries around the world to be equally receptive of the refugees. I noticed that President Obama has called for 10,000 refugees from the present conflagrations over there someday, I don't know when. But as you say, 17 states won't permit the refugees. I think this is a question that has to be faced by the president. You know, if our president calls for us to be generous and receptive and points out the advantages of courageous people coming into our country to be productive citizens, that would be the best approach. Those who came here from Cambodia and Vietnam, while I was president and subsequently, have made wonderful citizens. They've added a vitality and a stimulation to our economy and to our culture that has been very valuable. And my hope is that we'll see the same generosity and welcome in Europe, and also I think our country should also be in the leadership role. As you know, Canada has been quite open to the refugees. The United States has lagged behind. But there are many things that can be improved by our country. And one of the tragedies is that when our nation is known as the military and cultural and economic leader of the world, what we do and say has a great impact on other countries. If we stimulate generosity and welcome and sharing of our resources, others will do the same. If we don't do that, then that has a negative impact. But I have spoken out on it, both in Washington and here, and also in Europe. And my hope is that we'll see some more openness within the European community and also here in other countries for refugees. But I don't have any authority now, unfortunately, except just a lonely voice, which is not lonely when we have this conference. I feel that I have a lot of friends here and support, and I hope that while conclusions that we will reach tomorrow will be exciting and effective, and among American leaders, and we'll make sure they get a copy of our stimulation toward peace and human rights and welcoming refugees. And I hope that all of you, as I said in my speech, will join in and contact your own government, even though governments may not be your friends. I think you pick out key ones in your countries who can have an influence and make sure they get the copy of the message that we'll send from here. Thank you.
You have the moral authority, President. Thank you.
Yes. Our friends from, we have a wonderful delegation from the Congo, from our Carter Center partners, and I'd like to give the last word to them, to Rabi.
Thank you very much for letting us talk. Yes, I do come from the Congo, from Republic Democratic of Congo, which is the largest country in Africa after Algeria. And unfortunately, we haven't spoken about Congo during this conversation. I believe that President Carter already went to the Republic Democratic of Congo, and the Congo, since 1996, has known a war that, unfortunately, according to statistics which were given by experts, 5 million people were affected. And we have a lot of UN reports that have shown that Congo was the world capital of rape. And we didn't talk about that enough. Right now, there is a process in place that our constitution says that election must be organized in September, and the president should now leave power to another elected president. However, up to now, the election will not be organized, and this could unfortunately draw us into a new cycle of violence. And I don't have any questions to ask, but I'm here to listen, and I'm here to see if the President Carter and the Carter Center could get implicated into this and see what happened, because in my country up to now we have several rebellions, and that are somewhere in the country which could profit from this election cycle to provide insecurity and to try to use youth to rape, to kill. And so it is really important that from now on we should think about how Congo could be after this supposed election of this year. I spoke to a lot of people that are representing those countries around Congo, and right now our governing body in the Congo, where constitution has been changed, and Madame Sylvie Kinigi from Burundi can talk to us about what happened in Burundi. Constitution was modified in Congo, and population right now are living in those changes with very much frustration, which could encourage violence. And I would ask for you to get engaged from from President Carter, so we're not going to have killings, we're not going to have rapes because of those new elections that are coming up, which are reason for future violence.
Can I just answer, because I'm getting the signal that we've got to move to our next break. But we will, yes, Stella, Antonio. We're going to, what I just wanted to answer our friend from the DRC is that the Carter Center is, as you know, has the Human Rights House in Kinshasa, and has observed the elections there since 2006. Right now, the Carter Center is trying to consider whether it is advisable to observe elections if Kabila himself runs, despite it being illegal. So we are looking for the best way for the Carter Center to support democracy and human rights in the Congo through the work of civil society and the Human Rights House, and through observation of the mining industries, as you know. So we will continue this discussion later, only because we have to go to a break. But I want to start with our friends from the Congo and Burundi. Oh, Marianne wants to contribute.
Karin, I just want to elaborate and clarify something you said to our guest from the DRC, and that is based on President Carter's guidance. It's hard for me to imagine any circumstances under which the Carter Center would observe an election if President Kabila does not step down.
Against the will that if he insists on running against, despite its illegality, it would be difficult for us to legitimize that process. We wouldn't want to do that, but we want to support civil society. This is the key, is to support civil society. So we will continue to discuss this as we go forward.
Now, I want to thank all of you for this opening discussion. We will continue. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for us to speak together. I know we've started a discussion, and I hate to cut it off, but I promise you, if you're patient with me, I will give you you're on my list, and Junior, you're on my list, and Sylvie Kingi, you're on my list. So we will give you the voice very soon. Thank you for this opening session. Thank you, President Carter. Thank you, Laura, and thank you to our wonderful musicians, who, by the way, will open our next session at 3:30 with one more piece of music. Do not be late. Do not be late. Thank you.